Olá, seja muito bem-vindo a mais uma entrevista da FinTrender, a primeira de 2024. E hoje vamos tratar do tema CBDC. Eu estou aqui hoje com a Karen Ottoni, que é Senior Director de Ecosystem e de Strategic Initiatives da Hyperledger. Olá, Karen. Primeiro, muito obrigado aí por ter aceitado esse convite meu para participar dessa conversa. Acho que a gente tem muita coisa interessante aqui para conversar. Eu queria começar com você se apresentando um pouco, Karen. O que te levou para esse mundo de blockchain e como é que você começou na Hyperledger?
Bom dia, Gustavo. Bom dia a todo mundo que está escutando. É o meu prazer de estar aqui no podcast sua. Eu vou de desculpa já pelo meu português. Eu sou brasileira, nasci no Brasil, mas eu cresci nos Estados Unidos desde a idade de 2 anos. Então, eu só falo português de vez em quando, não sou nativo, mas é sempre legal ter a oportunidade de praticar e conversar com a nossa comunidade brasileira, portuguesa, o lusofono, né, do mundo inteiro. Como é que eu comecei no blockchain? Eu, como a história de muitas pessoas nessa área, você assim entra numa maneira bem atípica, né? Eu tinha assim quase uma outra vida antes. Eu trabalhava com projetos humanitários do governo americano, principalmente na África, mas também em outras regiões. E depois de um tempo eu queria assim mudar um pouco o meu foco, eu queria trabalhar mais na área de comércio, então eu fui e fez um MBA. E foi lá, durante que eu estava explorando várias coisas, eu comecei a ouvir sobre o blockchain. A minha escola, eu fui para a Duke University. Minha escola tinha um das primeiras cursos de cryptocurrency que existia. Isso foi em 2016, foi quando eu comecei, mas eu acho que o curso começou em 2015. Então foi assim bem cedo. E então tinha um professor lá que era muito assim avançado nessa área. E eu não fiz o curso, seria muito útil se eu tinha feito, mas não dava, sabe, não alinhava com os outros. Mas eu conversei com um estudante que já tinha formado e estava trabalhando em Nova York com a companhia Tata Consulting Services. No blockchain, ele estava conversando sobre o que ele estava fazendo, sobre a tecnologia, as oportunidades, o potencial. E eu achei muito interessante. Eu estava procurando, eu não sabia exatamente o que eu queria fazer depois, mas eu sabia que eu queria fazer uma coisa que teria impacto, impacto social, impacto significativo. E porque eu trabalhava assim na área humanitária antes, então isso era sempre uma coisa muito importante para mim. Então, quando ele estava conversando sobre assim, o blockchain, eu comecei a realmente entender e explorar, eu achei que seria uma área interessante para trabalhar depois que eu me formava. Então, eu fiquei em contato com ele e ele virou o meu boss. Eu trabalhei para ele. Foi lá que eu comecei a minha carreira no Web3 blockchain.
Entendi. E de lá, esse que chama lá não era a Hyperledger ainda, né? Era uma outra consultoria e
Não,
depois você foi para a Hyperledger?
foi Tata Consulting
É a
Services.
Tata Consulting, sim.
É uma grande empresa de IT, que é baseada na Índia, mas que trabalha em todo lugar no mundo.
Sim, sim, é uma das gigantes aí nesse setor. Aí você trabalhou com ele de um tempo, e como é que você chegou na Hyperledger depois, Karen?
Eu fiquei lá um tempo, aí tive como isso acontece em grandes empresas, tive um tipo de restructuring e eles me mudaram de time. Realmente, a gente tinha um time tão próximo, legal. Ainda sou amigos com esse time. Era um time de inovação e a gente estava trabalhando em divulgar, ensinar empresas sobre blockchain e os casos de uso. E com esse restructuring, eles mudaram o time. E eu não ia trabalhar assim só com a área de blockchain. E então eu me dei conta que realmente eu não estava interessada assim em trabalhar em IT, em consultoria sobre isso. Eu realmente queria me focalizar na área de blockchain e nessa indústria. Então eu comecei a procurar oportunidades e tinha essa oportunidade com o Hyperledger. E foi lá em 2018 que eu fiz a mudança para o Hyperledger e desde lá estou com a fundação de
Então já tem praticamente 5 anos que você já está na Hyperledger, já é bastante tempo, né?
Quase 6. Quase 6.
Muito bom. Entrando um pouquinho mais agora no tema do que você faz. Primeiro, acho que a primeira coisa, quando você entrou na Hyperledger, eu imagino que essa posição que você está hoje não é a mesma que você estava quando você entrou, né? Como é que foi essa tua trajetória dentro da Hyperledger?
Eu comecei como um ecosystem manager. O time de ecossistema no Hyperledger se lida com a nossa comunidade de membros. A fundação é uma fundação que a casa, digamos. É possível que eu vou precisar mudar para o inglês.
If you want to move to English, we can move, no problem. So I know that for me it was really, really good to have this conversation in Portuguese with you. And also knowing now that you are in the West since you were 2 years old. So your Portuguese is quite good, to be honest.
Thank you. I try to keep it up, and one thing that's been really wonderful about working at Hyperledger is that we are a global community, and we have an amazing community in Brazil that does a lot of great work. We have a regional chapter there. They do a lot of meetups and events. And I've been able to participate in supporting them, and that gives me the opportunity to speak in Portuguese and practice. So I love being able to do that. I wish I could speak better, but you know how it is when you're an adult. It's hard to find time to focus on learning. So maybe one day I'll be able to do the whole podcast in Portuguese.
I have quite the same issue in French, because I used to speak really good French, but I don't use French for, let's say, more than 20 years now. So there's always, you can start, but there's always some words that you miss. Then you need to do a really long workaround to get to this word. It's terrible.
Exactly.
So the conversation doesn't move anywhere.
Exactly. So luckily we still have English as being a pretty universal language.
And most of the people can understand that. So you were talking about your trajectory at Hyperledger.
So I joined the ecosystem team, which was at that time led by Daniela Barbosa, under Brian Bellendorf, who was the executive director that helped start Hyperledger at the time in 2015. Brian Bellendorf was very much involved in the Apache license at Mozilla. He's worked for the U.S. government, for World Economic Forum. So he's a great figurehead for open source technology. And he continues to work at the Linux Foundation even after he left Hyperledger. Hyperledger is actually part of the Linux Foundation. So Linux Foundation is like an umbrella for hundreds of open source foundations and projects, and Hyperledger is one of them. So we're kind of part of this bigger family of open source organizations. So the ecosystem team is really focused on our members, on our membership community, because even though open source is freely available for anyone to use, it isn't free for that technology to be maintained, supported, and hosted. And the way that is supported is through our membership fees. So as part of that, our members are using our technology. They're using it for their actual business processes, products, and services. And so they want to see that technology to continue to grow, to be sustainable, and more importantly, or equally importantly, vendor neutral as well. There's a lot of technologies out there where you build something and that company, changes priorities or loses funding or no longer exists, et cetera. And then you're stuck with software that you have to now change. So we very much are focused on enterprise use cases. This is something that you're going to be building your infrastructure on. And so we want that to be something that's long lasting, and an open source technology is what we believe is the best way to do that. And so our members support the ability to do that. And then we work with our members specifically on a lot of things where we highlight the work that they're doing. There's a lot of leadership opportunities and ways for them to engage in the community as well. So that's sort of what the ecosystem team focuses on. And then we have another team at Hyperledger, our community architect team. And we kind of all blend in. We all work together. We're a very small team. We're about 11 people. And they focus on the community, making sure that the tools and resources and the code bases are healthy, that we've got a lot of contributors, that it's easy to contribute, it's easy to get involved. And that we're essentially, our technologies are operating according to open source best practices. And so that's sort of the mission of Hyperledger Foundation, is we are here to be a neutral home for the good governance of open source technologies for enterprise blockchain.
Okay, great. And when you're talking about enterprise, you're talking also about governments, right? So one of the things that you are, everything.
Yeah, what we use, sorry, I say enterprise. When I mean that, I mean enterprise grade. So, things that are technologies that are at the level of, a business being able to depend on it.
Okay. And what I'm saying about government, because I saw your the report that you issued last semester about CBDCs, which was a really good report. I'll put the link on somewhere here for the people to get that as well. And there was one thing that's kind of was not a surprise, but it was different for me, is that there's a lot of systems that happen, blockchains, if I can say that Hyperledger has, right? So Fabric is most famous one, but you also have the Bezu, you have 5 or 6, and different central banks testing a lot of solutions that you have. Tell us about these systems, how you divide that, why some solutions are better on Bezu than on Fabric, and these things that you have there.
So we have, a lot of people usually come to kind of, hear about Hyperledger, come into our community through one of our technologies, and using it, or hearing about it, and they think that that's all we are. But we actually are a number of different DLTs, tools, and libraries. So it's a little bit kind of like you're just at the tip of the iceberg when you first get to know about Hyperledger, and then you realize, oh, I actually was literally an hour before this call talking to someone who was, kind of new to Hyperledger. They're based out of Europe. They have a client that wants to use Fabric, and they've used it a little bit, but don't really know much. And we're, basically these are a lot of the calls that I have where people are kind of new. They want to know how to use, how to connect, what do I do? And so a big part of my job is helping people understand how to do that, because there's many different ways you can kind of get involved. And I was showing him something that we have on our website called our DLT landscape. And he was like, oh, wow, okay, there's like a lot going on here that I didn't know about, right? So he came at it with like, okay, my client wants to use Fabric. We've also heard about Besu. We kind of wanted to explore that, but this client wanted, and then, we're sitting there on the phone together, and I'm showing them the DLT landscape, which I'll make sure to send it to you as well, so you can link it, and you get to see you get to get this bigger view of our ecosystem, which is really broad. So we have several DLTs, or layer ones, as you can call them. I've mentioned a few already: Fabric, Besu, Indy, Iroha, Sawtooth. These are other ones. They're all mostly general purpose, so that means you can use them for any use case, except for Indy. Indy is specifically designed for decentralized identity solutions. Iroha was designed specifically for mobile use, so it's a little bit more like lightweight in that sense. But they're all mostly, you can use them for, your supply chain use case, your, digital asset use case, health, whatever you want to use it for. There does tend to eventually kind of be a tendency, just because people will start with one and kind of want to continue with that. Often the decisions are made because of just the familiarity of the developers, like what the developers know. The language of the familiar of what developers, what they're used to. That's often been kind of the decision-making factor, more so than like this one's better for that.
There's one point here that I probably it's a point that people analyze as well, Karen, which is the size of the ecosystem, right? So of course there are more or less, there are DLTs, but they have different language, different things. So they're in different size of people working on it as well, right? So there's a tendency of, if I'm one of the analyzing which one to choose.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, there's the technical part. One of the parts is that, okay, this ecosystem is bigger than that one. That's also part of the discussion.
Yeah, for sure. There, some are written in Go or Java. So yeah, it depends, but I wouldn't say that there's any language that's like so obscure that there isn't large ecosystem. I think they're all, pretty accessible to any, experienced developers.
Okay. And talking about governments and CBDC, the approach that they have on this DLT is the same as the other companies and enterprise, or they have different concerns or different things that they analyze on choosing these DLTs or layer ones?
Yeah, governments are definitely different, right? They're, their goals are different. They're not trying to sell a product, right, or a service. It's usually like a use case where there's an operational efficiency being the goal. And in the case of CBDCs, that's a part of it, but a big part of it is also, modernizing the financial system. Currencies haven't really changed for a long time in terms of how they are, how the system operates. And I think given what has happened in the last 10 years with digital currencies, it's demonstrated that there's a lot of benefits and use cases to having a more, digital-based system. or token-based system, for example, that could unlock a lot of other things, such as, maybe financial inclusion, or even just, quicker settlements, or things that smart contracts can do, the automation of processes. I think each government has its own unique motivations, and they really do vary. You really can't compare one to the other. And so they'll be making those decisions based on their unique goals and their population. What do they feel their citizens need and want?
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of understand that you cannot compare them. It makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, from your point of view, you have a contact and discussion with a lot of governments and a lot of projects. So you're probably in a position that can see better which part of the world or countries are more advanced on this discussion. You can feel that there's part of the world that are more advanced. There was a discussion, for example, in blockchain and in crypto. There's always a discussion between the Asia and the Western world. Also regarding the discussion on ID, privacy, and then discussion. It's a different model. We are much more concerned about privacy and things than some of the countries in Asia. So you can see this kind of, not exactly on this point, but this kind of difference between the development of CBDCs on some part of the world.
In terms of the different motivations or the different stages that they're at, yeah. It's advanced a lot in the last, just even in the last year. I was actually on maternity leave for the beginning of 2023, and it was crazy when I came back to see all the announcements that had been made, all the things that there's so much had changed just in those 6 months. So I would say, whereas like 2 years ago, there was leader sort of countries that were really going for it, looking forward, doing it, others kind of waiting and seeing. And I think now there's less waiting and seeing. Everybody is dipping their toes in some way, and there's a spectrum of where they're at with that. Some countries have actually launched their CBDCs, and it's currently operating, such as Nigeria, Jamaica, Bahamas, and Eastern Caribbean. Others are just more, they're advanced stages of research. Monetary Authority of Singapore has done so much work. Bank of Thailand, Hong Kong Monetary Authority has done a lot of work. And then, Brazil, of course, is launched their pilot in June last year. And I think they plan to launch the CBDC, launch the DREX at the end of the year this year, if it stays on track. Banque de France in Europe has been doing a lot of different research. So I think we see a lot of activity happening. There's this tracker that you can go to on the Atlantic Council, gives you a nice view of what's happening overall. The ebook that you mentioned, the CBDC ebook that I put together, has a map and shows specifically where which countries are using Hyperledger technologies in their research and experimentations.
Yeah, and one thing that I found very amazing on the report and the experimentation that the central banks are doing is that I kind of divide their motivations in kind of two. The ones that are going for the payments, instant payments, and all the systems to use these systems for payments. The others that are more kind of using the smart contract, let's say the automation of money in this sense.
Mm-hmm.
So that's more or less the way you can divide that, or you have different views or different divisions?
I think there's they're all the motivations are pretty, there's a combination. I think you can definitely divide it that way. There's also just retail and wholesale.
Yeah, that's one.
A lot of countries are like, we're not going to touch retail. We don't really feel a need to do that right now. But like the wholesale use case is very relevant. Let's modernize the way that like our currency, is distributed between government and commercial banks. Others are very much all in on the retail aspect and say, we want this to be about financial inclusion. We want this to be about making it easier for people to get loans or pay taxes or receive aid from the government. So there's just different motivations for it, which I think is makes sense. Like there's the world is complex, and just like you mentioned earlier, privacy, there's different culture around privacy. And so the way that people are, different governments are exploring which technologies to use and how to design it also falls along, where they fall on privacy. For some, this is like a number one thing. We absolutely have to have everything be private. For others are like, it's important, but not as much. And so, they're prioritizing other things. And those decisions really make a big difference in design. Because if you are very heavy on privacy, then you're going to be more limited in how you can use performance or speed. The technology isn't there yet to make it operate at as quickly as we may want it. I think we will get there eventually, but those decisions make a big difference in design.
Okay, there's one thing that always, when I started let's say learning and reading about CBDCs, there's always about it was at the beginning, like 2015, 16, 17, to be honest. There was a big discussion about retail CBDC, the impacts that it could give to the economy, the role of the central bank in this world, the role of the banks and everything. So, and as far as I've saw, none of the central banks are now going for really retail CBDC that replicates cash on a digital environment, with all the private things and things. What's the model that you see that is more? What's the central bank now, Karen, that you see that is more close to this kind of digital cash using a CBDC that you can be anonymous, people can use to whatever they want. There's no tracking. The central bank cannot freeze the account and this kind of thing. Is there any central bank that's really moving in this direction? Or at least closer to that. I know that the European Central Bank has some kind of a mixed thing. You could have like a cash thing on CBDC, but with a limited amount. I think it's 2,000 or 3,000 euros, if I'm not wrong.
Yes,
up to that moment, you don't need to identify yourself or whatever. But after that, it goes to a kind of a CBDC that has all these features that they can block. So it's not really cash like anymore.
Yes, I think you'll never have something as completely, as completely like cash, because it would just disintermediate a lot of the financial institutions in the system. So I think there was a lot in the very beginning of sort of the CBDC becoming an area of exploration. I think commercial banks were very wary of it because they thought, okay, well, if the central bank is going to become a bank, like what do we do?
Yeah.
I think that that's not really a worry as much anymore. I don't know of any really central bank that wants to disintermediate commercial banks. and that wants to be directly working with the population. They have honestly no interest in that. You know, a lot of the criticism that you hear about CBDCs, it's like, you know, some banks will use it as a surveillance tool, etc. Of course, there's, you know, there's always potential for bad actors, you know, and certain governments have those tendencies. But the overwhelming majority of central banks want nothing to do with people's data. They're like, this is not our wheelhouse. We don't want to touch that. We don't want to see it. We don't want to deal with it. And so I think that we've really kind of come to this two-tier model. Like it's really replicating the existing two-tier model. Even in a retail CBDC context. Of course, wholesale, that's obviously going to be two-tier still. But even in retail, I think we will continue to see that model be the case. And there's much more of an interest in like, how do we, you know, facilitate collaboration with the private sector? And yeah, there's a lot of like, you know, very, you know, it's such an interesting exercise to explore this new world and use case. You know, and I think as people have done that, you know, you have to put a limit, because it would just have a lot of negative impacts if there wasn't. So I think it'll be something where like it's another option. I don't think we'll really get rid of cash anytime soon. I think it's going to be you know, another option, another thing to facilitate how we engage and transact. It's going to be part of of the ecosystem of different ways we, you know, use money.
Yeah, no, and I completely agree. I think that cash is we're gonna use less and less cash on a day to day, but it's gonna be there available in any case. I think just on what you're talking, what I find really amazing, and the more I research about that, the more I like the solution that Brazilian central bank has, which is a kind of not a kind, but a wholesale CBDC and a retail stable coin issued by the banks. So this model is really good on this, at least at the beginning, because it doesn't change anything on the way the financial system works now, right? The banks continue to do the same thing, and that's easier. Then you start in a second phase, I hope, that we're going to go for this discussion on the Brazilian Central Bank about with a retail CBDC. So it's probably a phased solution that's better than you going like the ECB is going for, let's say, directly to a retail CBDC. They have the limits, yes, but it's much more difficult to implement. Even and also considering that Europe is not just one country, right? So you have like 20-something countries, which is much more difficult to implement as well.
Yeah.
But it's good in terms of another point that we always touch when you're talking about CBDC, which is interoperability, right? So there's also a discussion about, okay, the central banks are looking for their ground, their country, but one of the main good things about these DLTs or layer ones is that they are global. You can interact on tokens everywhere in the world, right? So do you see that as a concern for the central banks nowadays to put on the systems or Hyperledger systems that they interconnect with other systems, Hyperledgers as well, like Bezu and also Fabric, for example, but also some layer ones that are out of the Hyperledger ecosystem?
I think that there's a lot that needs to be sorted out in terms of the, you know, rules and regulations around interoperability of digital currencies or digital of CBDCs. You know, I don't think that we're there yet with a clear framework for how to do that between countries. Technologically, it works. A Banque de France used a part of Hyperledger Cacti to connect a Fabric and a Corda network. And there's been other examples of things like that. So, it's possible technology-wise. I think figuring out how to actually do that between jurisdictions is still a ways away. But there's things like the, Swift Sandbox, which is built on Hyperledger Firefly, has a consortium of numerous banks and institutions that are involved in that, central banks as well, that are exploring, how do we create a system that allows for easy, quick exchange and settlement. So there's efforts to harmonize with that, and I think that's something where we're going to see probably in the next few years a lot of advancement towards. Right now, I think many countries are like, let me just figure out, in terms of CBDCs, I need to figure out my own CBDC first before I, kind of engage with others. I need to figure out how we do this wholesale, how do we, or do this retail, how do we connect the private sector, what are the use cases? What are the use cases that are really driving this? How do we, create a demand? What is the demand for this? Who's going, how is it going to be rolled out? And, what are the laws that we need to put into place for this? Because a lot of, central banks, they're doing the research, they're setting up the foundation for this, but they are still, they're not going to move forward until there is for example, the US won't move forward on doing anything related to a CBDC until Congress asks them to, right? And so, they're doing the research, they're doing the experimentations, the pilots, but there still has to come sort of a green light from the legislative bodies to to actually put this into operation. So I think that most countries are really focused on exploring this for the domestic, but you can a lot of countries are also very advanced in exploring cross-border, right? Especially in Asia. The central banks that I mentioned earlier, they've done tons of cross-border tests already, and are very advanced in that as well. So I think we'll see, more research and testing on interoperability. But first, what will come is, I think, the domestic pilots and launches.
Okay. Talking about you mentioned US and the Congress needs to approve and all these things that you said. So one thing that I always found amazing since I started in the financial market like 30 years ago is that the infrastructure of the financial market in the US, it's not one of the best in the world. I would say it lacks a lot of innovation that other parts of the world, like Brazil or Europe, they already have. So I can just to put one thing that comes to my mind, it's instant payments. So Europe has like, I don't know how many years it has. Brazil, it has for a couple of years. Last time that I saw, there was like more than 65 countries around the world that had instant payments, and the Feds and the US is just started implementing that last year. It's not really popular yet. Yeah. So it's getting better. People will start to use, but it's not really a common thing in the US anymore. But it's the biggest or the strongest currency in the world, right? The dollar. So and for the CBDCs, for me to be global, we need the financial system in the US to be on one of these layer ones or in blockchain as well. How do you see these movements? Is there any Hyperledger project that are helping? What they are testing now in the US, Karen?
So in the US, there's definitely been experimentations using Hyperledger technologies, Hyperledger Fabric, but also others. There was the Open CBDC project that was done with the Federal Reserve of Boston and MIT. that was open source, which is wonderful. You know, we want to see more of that kind of spirit where there's more open development, open sourcing of the technologies, so that others can, it's our belief it's actually more secure, because, you know, it's visible. You can see where the bugs are and the errors and fix them. Whereas in closed source, you know, you never know. But in terms of, you know, the US, I think, you know, governments, you know, I think there's a tension between being innovative and taking advantage of innovations, and also, you know, there's a risk to that. And I think with the US government, obviously, like being, you know, essentially the world reserve currency, there is less of an inclination to try out the latest thing, and, you know, more of an inclination towards ensuring stability. And so taking a more slow, measured approach, I think is also wise. You know, I think both work and for different contexts. I think now that there's been, you know, a good amount of, you know, projects and experiments done, both within the US and outside. You know, I was just at an event organized by the Digital Dollar Project and the Atlantic Council here in Virginia called Exploring CBDCs. And, you know, there's a growing sentiment that, you know, okay, like, I think this is sort of where countries are moving towards, and the US needs to show more leadership in that. And so I think we'll start to see more. A lot has happened, I think, less, you know, in private. There's been a lot of work that's being done at the different Federal Reserves. There's an innovation center in New York that's been doing a lot of good work as well. And I think we'll start to see more of that come from the US as the years go on. And there's a real interest in that because of the US dollar.
Okay. The amazing thing that we had all this, let's say, almost 40 minutes of conversation about talking about innovation in central bank, which if we had this conversation like 20
It's an oxymoron.
yeah, like some time ago, like 20 years ago, someone, come on, guys, innovation in central banks just to stabilize, to be very boring, not to innovate.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, you want government to be boring in some ways, right? That's what creates the, you know, assurance of stability that allows, you know, people to be able to conduct business because they know that they can, you know, rely on that. So in some ways, boring is good, but sometimes, you know, you need to shift and change. And I think that's really like, it's a huge cultural shift that central banks are engaging in. And it's a fascinating time if you work, I think, in a central bank, where you're, you know, they're really stepping outside of their comfort zone. And so I think it's amazing the amount of, you know, research that's been done so far on something that is, you know, fairly new. And so, you know, I applaud the different governments that have done that, because, you know, I think it's really going to enable a new way of us operating that's going to bring about a lot of different impacts.
Great. Karen, thank you very much. We are really close to the time that we have for this conversation. I would like to leave some time here for you to deliver let's say, the final message, and where the people can get in contact with Hyperledger and with you afterwards.
So, you know, we've talked a lot about the CBDC use case, but Hyperledger technologies are being used in carbon emissions tracking and sustainability use cases, in supply chain of, you know, the minerals or the different elements that are being used in your computer and phone, in healthcare, in insurance. So there's a number. So whatever it is that you are working on, whatever where you think there could be a way to unlock new use cases, new potential using blockchain technology, Hyperledger technologies, someone's doing something in it and there's something for you. Financial services just happens to be a really hot topic right now. But really, any digital assets is relevant. Our community we have a saying that all are welcome. We at Hyperledger Foundation are very focused on making our community, welcoming, easy to join, easy to get involved. We try to offer things in different regions, in different languages to make it more accessible. We are doing this in English. We started off in Portuguese. We did it in English. We know that English is obviously, a common language we use, but, sometimes it really makes such a difference to work in your own home native tongue. So we have had study groups done in Swedish, Japanese language documentation efforts. So there's so many ways to get involved. We have meetup groups all over the world. So if you look up on Meetup, look up Hyperledger, there's probably a community near you that you can join physically in person. If not, if you want to kind of learn more about the technologies themselves or get involved in the technical aspects, we have a Discord where you can go there, ask questions. You can learn about Besu Fabric, talk directly to the community, to the maintainers. It's open source. So, the invitation is there. It's just a matter of you showing up and participating. We put on a number of events and workshops. We have free workshops that go, we have webinars that are 1 hour, gives you a nice overview of a use case or a topic. And then we have 3 to 4 hour workshops where you're actually on your computer, learning how to do something. Our job is to help you engage and learn. And so any way that you want to do that, please reach out to us. We're always here to help and support the use of our technologies.
Great. From my side, thank you very much, Karen. It was really, really insightful for me. I took note of a lot of information that you gave, so I will research a little bit more on the things that you said. It was really good to know and to get your view from a person that's really on the discussion, right? Your discussion with all these guys and knowing the issues and the problems that they have. So that's really good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I encourage your listeners to get involved and reach out. We're always available and happy to help. That's what this community is all about.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Gustavo. Obrigada.
Obrigado. Conversa bem legal, né? Falamos de muita coisa aqui, da parte de interoperabilidade, da parte de como alguns países estão mais avançados do que outro, a parte das discussões entre CBDC de varejo e CBDC de atacado, conteúdo muito legal com quem está lá envolvido no dia a dia dessas discussões. Se você gostou, não esquece de deixar o like, de compartilhar com aquele amigo e amiga que gosta desse assunto e até a semana que vem. Tchau, tchau.